Lucky us, we have been joined by our resident pirate ship cat, Bo, for this introduction to Scallywagathon. If you're watching this, I hope that means you're one of the pirates who has decided to join us on the Scallywagathon Readathon this July. Scallywagathon has a bunch of new ways to play. Allie ended up creating a whole new world, a map, and just a whole bunch of new prompts and a new storyline to go along with Scallywagathon since it's been about 5 years. And this is my first time participating. I'm doing the mapped path, and I am ready to read about some pirates and go on an adventure to the Lost City. So grab your books, grab your maps. It's time for an adventure. Are you ready? Are you ready to go on an adventure? Or are you ready to take a nap? Ready to take a nap. You could also do that too. I'm gonna go on an adventure first, and then a nap. I finished my first book for Scallywagathon, and that is Treasure Island by Robert Louis Stevenson. This was a fast read. It took me a little bit longer than I thought. I was like, I could read this in like a day, easy, no problem. I think it took me about 2 days. I feel like the reason it took me a little bit longer than expected was because the book was published in 1883. So it's been a minute. And because the language wasn't as modern as I'm used to, it was a little bit hard to understand at times, but I had a good time. It's your very classic pirate treasure hunt. You end up meeting Jim Hawkins, who is the main narrator of the entire book. He's a young boy. And Captain Flint is the captain of the ship. But everything goes wrong because we meet the pirate John Silver, Long John Silver. And when that name came up, my first thought was of the restaurant. Sorry. But while the language was a bit hard to understand sometimes and really get with the flow of things, it was such a classic pirate adventure. It was a really good time. And I'm kind of surprised I had never read it before. We follow Jim Hawkins, who is a boy in this town. He runs an inn with his mom, and a pirate comes in, or I don't think we're supposed to know they're a pirate, but everyone's kind of like, that's a pirate. This pirate comes in, and it just kicks off this whole adventure because there's other pirates after this guy, and because Jim and his mom have kind of rifled through the other pirates' pockets after he died, they found something they were not supposed to. And they end up going to another town for safety. Jim ends up going on this big adventure with the captain of the boat, Captain Flint, and his crew that he has picked out with the help of John Silver, because Jim has found a treasure map to Treasure Island. They set off on this adventure. They're almost to Treasure Island when Jim, who's hiding, accidentally overhears a little bit of mutiny going on with John Silver and some of the crew. And so when they get onto Treasure Island, that's when all the shit starts kicking up. Like, we've got the good guys, the non-pirates, who are holed up in this house, and they're not willing to give up the treasure map. They're not willing to give up any info. And then the pirates, who they were kind of, I think some of them were crew of the original captain who hid his treasure on Treasure Island. And so they're trying to find it. And then there was also a pirate that was marooned on Treasure Island. He's been there for about 3 years, I think. He's not as crazy as you would imagine, being in isolation that long. It was such a classic pirate adventure, and it was a good time. I think it was just a really great way to kick off Scallywagathon, just in true pirate fashion. You're going on a treasure hunt. That's what we're doing. We're looking for the Lost Island. They were looking for Treasure Island. So that is my first book down for Scallywagathon. And I ended up giving it a 3. It wasn't the best pirate adventure I've ever read, but it did give me a sense of nostalgia, and I really enjoyed that. I would like to read more books that have that classic pirate adventure of going after treasure. If anybody has any recommendations for that, please leave them down below. Whether or not they're written in the 1800s or now, user's choice. I also ended up reading The Adventures of Amina al-Sirafi for Allie's 24 hour. That was just like a little over a week ago. And this wasn't for any of the prompts. This was just kind of an additional book for me. And it was really good. I didn't realize it was the start of a series, but I do like how it ended. I enjoyed it overall. I think I gave this one a 4, and it was a good time. I did like that this followed a female pirate, and it had a little bit of sci-fi in it. It had a lot of religious tones in it, which I didn't mind. And I also like that it was based in like the Indian Ocean. It wasn't based with a lot of European background as a lot of pirate books, pirate movies are. So that was a nice change. It also has a fun map. I love a good map. I love books with maps. And so while we were reading this, Allie was ahead of me when I joined her for the 24-hour. And during the breaks, we were discussing it a little bit. And there were some things that she had picked up on. And she was able to give me the page number, or like roughly the page number, because I think we had a couple of different editions. She was able to pick up on stuff. And after I finished the book, I was like, aha, I see what we did. This was really good. I liked the ending. I liked the twist, I guess you could call it. So I'm excited to read more from this author. I also didn't realize that they wrote City of Brass, which is also on my TBR. So I'm excited to read more from this author. I am excited to continue the series. I don't think the second book is out yet, but when it comes out, this might be a series that I look into buying and keeping for myself, because I'll probably want to reread this one just to reacquaint myself with what happened. But it had pirate adventure. It had some sci-fi stuff in it. It went in a totally different direction than I thought it was going to, because I think Allie said this as well. It's a pirate adventure without a lot of pirating, if that makes sense. And after finishing the book, I understand. And I do wish there was a little bit more pirating in the book, but I did like the adventure overall. So this was just a bonus book. I'm going to count it anyway. I'm going to count it as a bonus book for Scallywagathon. So 2, I guess, technically out of 6, because there's 5 prompts. So 2 out of 6 done. I don't think I mentioned it, but for the first prompt for book number 1, Treasure Island, the prompt was Trust and Treachery, and we started at Shattered Mast. And from Shattered Mast, we are traveling to the Veiled Monastery, and we are going to be reading On Stranger Tides by Tim Powers for the prompt Sea Legends. I thoroughly enjoyed this book. This was such a fun book. I wasn't really sure what to expect from it, but we had pirates pirating, we had Blackbeard, we had the Fountain of Youth, although I think they kind of referred to it as the Fountain of Life. And we had magic, we had people getting captured, we had people who didn't want to be pirates, they had to turn to the pirate lifestyle. We had so much happening, and it was a damn good time. On Stranger Tides follows, he doesn't start out as a pirate, but I'm going to use his pirate name of Jack Shandy. He's on his way to meet his uncle, I think in Jamaica, because his uncle has basically stolen all of his dad's inheritance money. And the boat that he's on is attacked by pirates. That leads them on this wild adventure. We have Blackbeard the pirate, who is a legend just by himself, and he's trying to figure out a way to live forever. Also on board the boat was a famous professor and his daughter Beth, and then her dietitian, but the dietitian is also friends with the dad, and they're in cahoots together, and they're up to no good because Beth's mom died like a long time ago, and so her dad wants to resurrect his wife, but he wants to use Beth to do that. So he's got a deal that he made with Blackbeard, and these pirates that are coming on board, they work for Blackbeard. It's a whole mess, but oh my God, it was a wild ride. There were a couple points where it kind of dipped a little bit low, but it was really fun to see Jack go from this kind of proper English regular guy into full-on pirate mode, because he's got to use his wits to survive. He ends up making friends with the captain of the pirates who ended up taking over the ship that he was on. Throughout the whole adventure, Jack is like, I'm going to get Beth out of here. I'm going to save her. So he ends up just right alongside everybody trying to go to this fountain of youth, trying to stop all this magic from happening, all of these weird resurrections that are going on. Because there's so much magic in this book, so much more than I expected. And it kept me wanting to read. It kept me on the edge of my seat. I didn't want to put this down, so I read it pretty quickly because the action just did not stop. And this was the perfect book to read for this prompt because you have the Legend of Blackbeard, you have the Legend of the Fountain of Youth, you have they reference a lot of like voodoo magic in particular. So much happened. I would like a copy of this book so I could read it again and experience the adventure all over again, which isn't something I was expecting. I ended up giving this a 4 out of 5 and just had the best time with this book. I love a good book about legends and myths. This book just hit every expectation I didn't know I had. Now that we have finished our time at the Veiled Monastery, we are going to be on our way to Howler's Rest Ruins. The prompt for this one is At World's End, and this is going to be focusing on a book about isolation or survival. And I ended up choosing Island of the Lost by Joan Druett, which was a nonfiction book, and I don't know how I didn't realize that because everything I read was like the true story about this situation. So I don't know why it didn't click until like halfway into the book. But this was a nonfiction, which I was fine with because it made it a little more interesting to learn that these events actually happen to people. But on the flip side of On Stranger Tides, this one was a little harder to get through. We focus on 2 different crews. For a good part of the first half of the book, we do end up focusing just on one. We end up following these 2 crews that both end up getting wrecked on one of these small islands about 280-ish miles off the coast of New Zealand. And they're just far enough out of the way, out of the normal shipping routes that most people they're not going to know that they're there. The 2 crews end up getting wrecked at 2 different times. About a year passes since the first crew got wrecked when the second crew gets wrecked. And they get wrecked on 2 different parts of the island and they never meet up with each other. The first crew, I think they're there for maybe 2 years. It's been about a week or so since I finished the book. I want to say it's been about 2 years since they got wrecked, and they were only a crew of 5. They did band together. They end up doing a lot better than the second crew. When they get wrecked, I think the second crew is there for about a year, but it's a very large boat, a very large crew, and things don't go well. There's a lot of fighting. The boys don't know how to get along, and things go very badly very quickly. I did enjoy this book, but I don't want to say it was a slog to get through, but they did use a lot of, or the author, I suppose, used a lot of scientific terms for the wildlife and like the surrounding area when they were using the journals to make this into a story. And so that kind of took me out of it because, one, I don't know how to pronounce half of these big scientific words, all right? Those are $5 words. I got to stick to $2 and under words. We got to stick to our sales. I need a 2 for 1. So the scientific language was a little rough, but also the journals that the information and the stories were pulled from, all of this happened in like the 1860s to the 1870s. So it's been a hot minute. The vernacular used back in the 1800s is obviously going to be very different from the vernacular used in 2025. It took me a while. It took me longer to get through than I thought it would, but it was still really interesting. There were some points with like the day-to-day kind of life that I was like, we maybe could have cut down on this a little bit, but it was fun to see like how these crews sit there after they get wrecked and they're like, all right, we don't know if anybody's going to come by. The first crew they were supposed to have like the guy that they bought the boat from. They were like, all right, if you don't hear from us after a certain amount of time, you need to go to the government and then send a boat out for us. They're banking on it, but as time goes by and no search crews come by, they kind of lose hope in that case, but they also are like, all right, we're going to be stuck here for a while. We got to make the best of it. And I really enjoyed seeing how they learned and grew together, at least the first crew, in order to survive, because the second crew went in a totally different direction with trying to survive. And it was so frustrating to watch the second crew, honestly, because you did have some people who were like, we have to make this work. We don't know if we're going to get out of here, but we have to make this work. And then you have other people who just want to kind of sit back on the beach and hope for the best. So it was very frustrating for the second crew. But overall, it was a pretty good book. I gave this one 3 stars just because it didn't capture my attention as much as I was hoping it would. I do love a good book about isolation and survival, and this had that, but it just, the language used, a lot of scientific terms, which I understand because they're pulling from the journals. It did feel pretty slow in multiple parts of the book. It was still a good time. I enjoyed it, so 3 out of 5, not bad. So we're doing pretty good on our trip so far. We're making our way to the Lost City. Remember how I said we were doing good? Yeah, then this happened. So from Howler's Rest Ruins, we made our way over to Dreadspire, and the prompt for that one was taking on water. And did we ever take on water? For this prompt, I obviously ended up reading The Bone Ships by R.J. Barker, and it did not turn out at all how I was expecting it to. Now, I went into this knowing that it was a trilogy. I did not go into this knowing how absolutely bonkers it was going to be. I have a lot of complaints, and I will not be continuing the series anytime soon, but probably not ever, to be completely honest. I just want to read the summary on the back of the book, okay? Just so we're all on the same page. For generations, the fleets of the 100 Isles have built their ships from the bones of ancient dragons to fight an endless war. All right, I'm already interested. The dragons disappeared, but the battles for supremacy persisted. You're pulling me in even more. Now, the first dragon in centuries has been spotted in far-off waters. Say less, it's an adventure I'm in. Both sides see a chance to shift the balance of power in their favor, because whoever catches it will not only win glory, but the war. See, that I was like, count me in. Put me in, coach. I'm down, because dragons, adventures, not technically pirates, but like sea battles, basically. I'm in. That's really exciting. So what happened? Seriously, what happened? We're following a couple of characters. Well, we follow a pretty big cast of characters in this book, but 2 of the main ones are Joan and Maes. And it's just, we could have done so much more with this book. This book had a lot of potential, and I didn't really fall flat. It kind of went in about 15 different directions. This kind of felt to me like the author read Lord of the Rings and went, oh my God, that's so cool. They made up an entire new language just for the elves. I'm going to do that. And so they proceeded to do that by renaming basically everything in the world in this book. They were creating a world, and I understand that, but it also felt like they were reinventing the wheel. They gave a new name to every single thing you could imagine. Instead of calling the people who captain a boat like a captain, they're called a shipwife. Okay, and luckily there's a small appendix in the very back, but even then, it doesn't cover half the lingo that you encounter in this book. Because why did we need to rename almost every single thing that you could just have given a regular, like a spyglass? They call a near glass. We didn't need to do that. We renamed everything, and we really didn't need to. And honestly, I probably wouldn't have minded as much if you had done a decent job of world building, because They did not do a very good job of world building. This felt like I was just dropped into the world and expected to understand everything about it without really having any background. Because of that, I had zero connection to any of these characters. I really didn't care what happened to them, to be honest, because there are a few times where there's a close shave and you're like, oh shit, you may not make it out of this, whether that's one character or a whole crew. And I was like, I don't really care, to be honest. It really felt like just way too complicated, way more complicated than it should be, because while there was a lot of description in the book, it did not help me at all. I was trying to reread multiple passages multiple times, and even then, I was like, I still don't really know what the hell is going on. And because some of the titles for crew on the boats are very similar to each other, I was getting people confused because I was like, okay, because, the crew, just the regular crew, they refer to the higher ups with their title. They're supposed to. I don't know who these people are. And the titles don't mean a damn thing to me. So while occasionally the little index in the back was helpful, it wasn't nearly helpful enough. It just felt way more complicated than it really needed to be. My friend Keisha read this book a couple years ago, and after I got done with it, she shared her thoughts with me and shared her review that she had written at the time. And the thing I love about Keisha is we are basically the same person when it comes to books, because if she's read a book and then I read it, we both tend to enjoy it, and vice versa. Or if I'm looking through Storygraph and I'm going to add a book to my TBR and I see that Keisha has read it and she's enjoyed it and like rated it, 4 or higher, I'm like, I'm going to enjoy this book. So she ended up reading this in about 2022. She ended up DNFing the second book, and our thoughts, once again, just matched up very well for this. She had the same thoughts that I did. You're just dropped into the world. There's no world building. We don't really understand. You don't get to understand the magic system of the world. She brought up a good point. Multiple POVs would have been fantastic because there's so many different characters, but you do end up following a couple of main ones. But there is one specific crew member on pretty much every boat that's very important to how the boat works. That would have been an excellent point of view. But we didn't do that, did we? One phrase that she used in order to describe this was words not serving the story. And I was like, that is exactly how I would describe this book. Words not serving the story. It just felt like the author wanted to create this whole new world, a whole new language, and just expected you to understand what was going on. And so they throw in everything that they've thought of, everything they've dreamt up, which is great. Come up with a whole new world. Come up with a whole new magic system. I want to know about it, though. You don't tell me anything about it. You just dropped me into this world and we're like, all right, so now we're going to go over here and this big thing is happening. And there were only a couple times where there was like a battle scene or something going on either on the sea or on land that I was kind of getting invested in, but it was really hard to get through this. I didn't care about the characters. I couldn't connect with anyone. There was no world for me to learn about. It was just really confusing. We're trying to reinvent the wheel by reinventing an entire language by just calling certain things a different name. It felt a lot of it was unnecessary. So this got a 2.5, which we've gone downhill since we've started this journey to the Lost City. So this was disappointing. It's really sad because it sounded really interesting. It's got dragons. It's got not pirates, but like you've got this faction over here who's battling a different faction in an entirely different part of the world. It had so much promise to create this really interesting and intricate world and just didn't deliver. It kind of fell flat from the start. It was just coasting along. Occasionally something would happen, but overall Very disappointing. We have made it to Dreadspire, and dread is a way that that's a word I would use with this book. We're done here, and we're done with this. On to the Lost City. I had a couple minutes before I start stream, but I finished Natural Beauty yesterday, and it was a wild ride. So we are finally at the Lost City. We are at the end and wrapping up our Scallywagathon pirate adventure. For this prompt, I ended up picking the same prompt that would kind of wrap up the storyline for the prompt for where I started at Shattered Mast. And the prompt for my Lost City adventure is a book on my TBR that I think is going to be 5 stars. I kind of don't even know where to start with this book because it ends up being so damn trippy. So we end up following this young woman who's working at just a regular diner in New York, and she goes to work at this place called Holistic, and it's got a bunch of like holistic medicines and serums and creams and all that kind of stuff. Very a high-end boutique kind of situation. Things are not as they seem because the longer that she's there, the weirder shit gets. This young woman is Chinese American, used to be this big child piano prodigy, and then her parents get into this really bad car accident. So she's been working to not only try to help pay the assisted living place that they're living, but also just to pay her own bills. And so when the opportunity comes for her to work at Holistic, it kind of seems like a blessing in disguise because her living situation is not great. Her roommates are just complete assholes, and the place that she's living also isn't great. It was really interesting and really creepy because I listened to the audiobook to hear all these transformations as they're taking place throughout the book the longer that she works there. There are some extremely disturbing visuals, and it got a little trippy in a few places. I had to re-listen to a couple of passages a handful of times. The shit that was happening when we got to the end of the book, and again, things just keep getting weirder and weirder. There were some things at the end where I was going, what the hell is happening? And it didn't end quite as I was expecting it to. I wouldn't really call it a twist necessarily, but maybe like a mini twist. Because I was expecting the book to go in one way that may not have been a very happy ending, but it went in a different direction. And I was okay with it. It turned out it was still a pretty interesting ending overall, but unfortunately I don't think this was a 5-star for me. This was one of those books where there's a lot of weird experimentation happening, and most of the time when it's something like that, obviously the reader is going to pick up on something ain't right here. Some weird's going on. You know, in a lot of books, the main character doesn't really know what's happening. They're completely blind to it and don't have any clue, or they don't pick up on it until the very end. But our main character in this book kind of had a little feeling of off from the start, and that feeling carries along with her throughout the book. So she's not completely blind to it. She can tell this place is kind of weird, gives me a weird feeling. Something's off, like something's off with the people, something's off with the store, with the different practices, with the different medications and the different beauty products that we're selling. So we're in this together. The reader and the main character are in this weird situation together. And it's kind of nice to see a main character who also can tell some things are not as they seem, and she needs to be a little more protective of herself and her body. But that doesn't really end up happening. Not without her not trying, though. She's still trying to maintain a little bit of distance and keep herself safe. But like, she's not safe. No one is safe. It was really creepy. I've had overnight to kind of sit and think about it. I think I would give this one a 4-star. It was so creepy and unnerving, which I really enjoyed that part. But I don't know, it was getting there, but it just didn't quite hit the 5-star
level for me, unfortunately. I wouldn't count this as a failed prompt because I know the author Ling Huang. I've seen her new book kind of being talked about recently in the past couple of months. And so because her new book has been getting a lot of praise and it sounded interesting, this one also sounded interesting. And I really thought, I was like, okay, this could be a 5-star for me. Unfortunately, it wasn't, but I'm still glad I read it. Had a little bit of horror, a little bit of sci-fi, a little bit of a thriller, kind of a little bit of a mystery. It was really good. I really enjoyed this. Maybe I'll bump it up to a 4.5. It might, 4 or 4.5. Unfortunately, not a 5-star. Very fun way to wrap up Scallywagathon. It definitely wasn't a pirate book. There were no pirates anywhere, but I couldn't find a pirate-specific book to fit this prompt for me. But I'm still really glad I read this one, and it was a fun way to wrap up the readathon because I haven't read a lot of horror recently and I've wanted to jump back into that genre. I had to move the camera back because my hat is too big and wouldn't fit in the frame. That wraps up Scallywagathon 2025. This was my first year participating and I had a damn good time with this readathon, because who doesn't love pirates? I ended up taking the mapped path, which is the OG way to do this readathon, and we have gone on a journey. I've really enjoyed using like the map that Allie created, this whole world that she's created, along with not just prompts, but stories to go with the prompts. And I'm going to leave all the readathon info down below. Technically, the readathon was for the month of July, but you can do this at any point during the year. So if it's February and you're like, I need a little break from the snow and I'm feeling a little bit piratey, girl, go ahead and do this in February. It's totally fine. But I will leave the website below. I will leave Allie's links to her booktube and her Twitch below. Please go and give her a follow. If you also were a part of Scallywagathon, please let me know. Leave some comments. Tell me what books you read. And if you had any books for this readathon that you read and enjoyed, please leave them below, whether or not they're pirate themed. Thank you guys for hanging out with me for this readathon. Let me know if you also read any of the books that I read. Let me know which path you chose for Scallywagathon as well. Thanks for hanging out. Thanks for watching. Please leave me a comment below. Make sure you like and subscribe, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye.